Hello and welcome to the deepest dive on Armored Core 6 from MinnMax. My name is Jacob Geller. I will be your handler today. We are very excited to be talking about Armored Core 6. This episode will be just Chapter 1. We are taking it chapters at a time, and this episode will be just the first chapter. We won't be spoiling anything beyond that chapter because I personally have not played it, and I don't think my guests have either. Joining me today is a kind of MinnMax All-Stars. Well, one of them is, and one of them is a soon-to-be MinnMax All-Star, from the very first cohort, Suriel Vasquez.
That's me.
Welcome.
I lit the first flame of MinnMax, yeah.
That's right. And the first time on MinnMax, though not the first time I have benefited from hearing thoughts on games from this person. We are joined by formerly of Waypoint, currently of Remap Radios, Renata Price. Welcome, Renata.
Hello, hi, howdy, and hello.
We have a somewhat unusual squad for this deepest dive because I'll call them out. The rest of MinnMax were cowards, and they did not want to sign up for this game, which may or may not be completable by normal people. But I thought, who are the most mech-pilled people I know? And I think I did a pretty good job in getting Suriel and Renata on here, because both of you have, like, a significant history with people getting in robots, right?
Extremely significant.
Yeah.
Okay, I am so glad that you are here, and I'm ready to jump into that. Before we do, I just want to tell you that if you are listening to this deepest dive and enjoy it and think, gosh, I have something to say that they didn't cover and I want them to cover it, well, you can get in on the next episode by joining MinnMax at the $2 tier, just $2 a month. You can submit comments to the deepest dive. I'll be reading those comments all this show. And if you join at the $5 tier for MinnMax's Patreon, you will get this whole episode and every other deepest dive and everything else we do as a podcast. So you can listen to this as a podcast rather than just watching it on YouTube. MinnMax is a very friendly place to hang out. And there's also channels in the Discord where people are talking about Armored Core more. There's all sorts of stuff. But that's all for later. Let's start off with Armored Core history, I guess. I'll go first. I have none. Suriel, have you ever played an Armored Core before this?
I've not played an Armored Core before.
Okay, well, great. We saved the best person for last. Renata, tell us about Armored Core history.
I had not played Armored Core, but then I went on a little tour of the older games before this one came out. Over the last few months, I've like dipped into pretty much every era of Armored Core to like get a handle on like how it specifically like feels, how it controls, like what it's aiming for like narratively and mechanically. And so I wanted to like have a good understanding of at least what like they're aiming for before I like came into AC6. And so I played through a little bit of 1, a little bit of 3, a little bit of Last Raven, and then I played through all of 4 Answer a few times, actually. Once on my own, and then once on a stream with Remap Radio with my co-host Kato. And so, yeah, I really like loved what I played. I was not able to get access to AC 5 or its sequel or its like semi-sequel Verdict Day because those games cannot be played the fun way. You can't play those on a cool PS3.
Yeah.
It is kind of remarkable how big From is and how dominant Souls and Elden Ring and Bloodborne all are, and yet up until now this series has essentially been not accessible on modern hardware. Like it's For people going back, I feel like you really have to make an effort to explore the series history. And so I've just been watching videos of YouTubers who are more committed than me and have been doing that. Also, I forgot to mention this, and Ben will get mad. If you join MinnMax on Patreon today, which is Sunday, or Monday, or Tuesday, or Wednesday, we are going to send you a Steam code. We have 70 total Steam codes to send out, including Dead Cells, Return to Castlevania, and other great games. If you join at any tier, we'll send you a game code. That's it. That's all the place setting got out of the way. Suriel, you haven't played Armored Core, but what is your where would you define your mech loyalty? Where have you learned about people getting in robots?
It's like basically 90% Gundam, 10% other stuff. I probably should have mentioned that I haven't played an Armored Core game, but I did play From Software's other mech game, Chrome Hounds, for a while.
Oh gosh, I didn't even think about that one.
People don't think about Chrome Hounds very often, but that game was way more multiplayer centric. But it's like a similar thing. But like in terms of overall mech history, yeah, I basically grew up on Gundam. It was like one of those early things where I just caught it on Toonami, when they had their like what was it called? Basically the precursor to Adult Swim, where they called it the Midnight Run, where they would just air a bunch of stuff, and then Gundam Wing, and basically just followed all of Gundam throughout the years. And I didn't even get into like Ava until they brought it to Netflix, because we just didn't have access to it. But along the way, there's a lot of Robotech in there as well, which is like a precursor. It's like also ran, I think, a lot Macross. I think it's called in Japan. And that one, it just has like robots that are transformed into planes and back. It's not as extensive as a lot of Gundam stuff, but similar vein. And then from there, just kind of getting into various mech games and a somewhat sordid history of playing licensed Gundam games and being almost always disappointed, except for like the rare exceptions where like the multiplayer ones are the good ones, like Gundam Wing Battle Assault and Gundam Versus, I thought were both pretty good. But a lot of the single player stuff has not been good.
Excuse me. I will say that what is it called? Gundam Battle Operation Fairy. Is that what it is? Gundam.
Is that the recent one with that has like the all girls squad?
Yes, Gundam Battle Operation Code Fairy. That is what I was thinking of.
To be fair, I haven't played it.
No. It's not good. It's not good in the traditional sense. But if you would like a very short, like very goofy Gundam story about like 4 girl Xeon pilots, all like fighting a like guerrilla war on Earth in 0080, I think.
Is that towards the end of the 1 year war then?
Yes, I believe it is.
Okay.
I believe it's towards the end of the 1 year war. And I believe, they're like a small base on Earth as the the Federation is starting to like push Xeon back off of Earth. It's not good, but it is fun.
Yeah, like Meier is definitely more like the PS2. Like, here's the journey to Chuburo, where it's 6 hours long, and none of the actual machines are to scale. So like there will be tanks and stuff, and they just look like cars when they should be like up to waist length. And so being that kind of nerd about it, but I played a bunch of them, and most of them were not good.
No, they're not.
Okay, so at the start of every show, I have this giant Google Doc full of comments from the MinnMax community. We like to play a little game called Most Common Comment, where each of you guess what did the most people write about in terms of this just chapter 1. Surreal, what do you think people wrote about the most?
Chapter 1 boss? The end of chapter 1
boss. Ren, how about you?
I was also going to guess the chapter 1 boss.
In fact, although we did receive many comments about the chapter 1 boss, I think the most common was just the feeling of moving around in this game. That was really like the most people writing about moving around. A lot of people saying that it felt good, some saying that it felt bad. I loved this one from Russ A, who said, last night, as I lay in bed and closed my eyes, I felt like I was sliding and dashing around in my mech. I don't think that has happened to me in a video game ever. Has that happened to anyone here for any games? I think it's happened to me when I've been playing like VR, but like that feeling of just being so in tune with the mech that you are seeing it when you close your eyes, I feel like it's kind of thematically appropriate for this game, and it's very cool that it happened to Russ.
Yeah, it's like I did want to talk about the feel for like ever, because it just feels like it just feels so unique compared to anything else out there. And I kind of it's sort of like, we'll get to it I guess when we start talking about the game in full, but it does feel like you're entering like a luxury like vehicle or like a high performance F1 racer, where it's just like I can feel the power of this thing, but I am in no way equipped to control it fully. And just like, I think a lot of my progress is going to be made through upgrades and stuff. But I think so much of it is just like, I need to learn how to properly utilize the like control scheme. And that will like, I feel like I could beat this game with like default weaponry if I just played better in a way that is not typical of games today.
Yeah, it is really fascinating. And it is, I'm sure we'll talk about like how most of us have experienced from, which is the very slow, very deliberate Souls series, where it's like, you know, even when I'm panic rolling away, or even in like Bloodborne or Sekiro, you're not moving like this. And suddenly jumping into a game where you're moving this fast is very cool and very exciting. Let's just talk about that first mission, because I feel like that's kind of a good place to start in terms of like, you can't customize anything. It's pretty simple. And yet, it is still kind of, it still feels like it's throwing you into the deep end in some way. So the game starts, there's this very cool cutscene. We are released from space by our handler. We get shot with an orbital laser, who I am not sure who it's controlled by necessarily.
We are shot by, we are not shot with it. We are shot through it. I guess we are launched out of that laser, right?
No, there's also a shot. Like there's an orbital defense system that is most likely operated by one of the corporations of the Rubiconians that wings you as you're going down. That's why you end up landing so far off course. And like Walter's like within acceptable range, it's because you were actually shot pretty accurately, but then were blown out of the air and so crashed. And that's why your mech is in like absolutely terrible condition when you start that first mission.
Yeah, and so you land, and there is, let me find this comment. The sixth guy says, I wanted to mention my favorite part of the first mission, the tree right next to you the first time you land on the planet, as if it was a ruler, the perfect object to grasp the scale of your AC. As everyone knows tree equals tall, which I really like, because I think the environments of this game are so big sometimes that you can lose track of how big or small you are. And so I love the idea of like, well, they put you next to a tree, and we know that we are 3 trees tall, so we're very tall. But you land, you have just a very simple machine gun and a sword, and you just kind of go around and kill some mechs. Did you feel cool immediately? Because I felt cool immediately.
I mean, yes and no. Like, this is yes and no, because like one of the things I'll say is that like I played a lot of 4Answer before this, and 4Answer is like several times faster than this game you can go pretty fast in Armored Core 6. In 4Answer, you fight like a hummingbird, or like a hummingbird or a rabid dog, somewhere between those two feelings. And so when I started 6, it took me a sec to get used to the new movement speed, which is like considerably slower than 4Answer. But once I did, like I have gotten to the point where I can like feel this game in the back of my head. I've turned the first boss into a meditative ritual for myself. I have put like probably 15 hours or like probably like 10 hours into that first boss alone, just playing it over and over again because I just love the feeling of it. And I wasn't allowed to play past chapter 1 for the show. And so like, yes, I did feel cool immediately. I was like, I am absolutely in love with the way that AC6 feels.
I think it's so interesting that, and maybe Ren, with your experience of the series, you can tell me why this is, but it's like you have the normal walking speed, but it seems like you basically never want to be using that, because you can also have like your normal locomotion, which isn't using up any like energy, can be like boosting around, where you essentially feel like you're on like omnidirectional roller skates. What is the normal walking speed like just a punishment for running out of energy? Is there any tactical advantage to like using that?
I mean, it depends on the specific like kind of legs you're using. There are situations where like tank treads, that answer is like sometimes yes, kind of, but that's because tank treads like function differently than other leg forms. But like I think if you're talking about like reverse jointed legs or like standard like bipedal legs, like probably not. You will basically always want to be boosting, at least on the ground. In the air, you may want to let yourself go into free fall a little bit more, but I would say that it is a very boost heavy series. I mean, in the earlier games, walking was basically mandatory. If you tried to boost everywhere, you would one, run out of fuel, and two, had to one, you would run out of fuel, and two, it was so fast that it was like, compared to your turning radius, your turning speed, it was actively difficult to control when you're boosting. Versus here, where it's like non-boosting movement is mostly vestigial. And that's been true like since like, I would say like 4 and 4 answer.
Micah Tillman wrote in and said, I felt completely exhausted after beating the opening mission on Friday. I imagine most of that came from learning the controls. There are 3 movement states on the ground that you switch between using 2 different buttons. There are 4 movement states in the air that are triggered by 3 different buttons. Dodge is on the wrong button compared to all other FromSoft games, but you can dodge with just the left stick if you are in midair zoom forward attack mode, which I think is a good summary. Though I was surprised that I was a little worried this game was going to be more complicated to control than it ultimately is. And I think some of that comes from hearing about Armored Core from other people and hearing about people like holding their controllers backwards.
So just to note, as a historical note, that is a bit. That is Armored Core players making fun of themselves so effectively that it ended up falling into the like public imaginary as how Armored Core is actually played. Doing that reverse control scheme like that would actually like benefit you very, very little in 4 answer.
Is there like is a claw grip like an actual thing that people would do?
Oh yeah, you would definitely do a claw because like for the older AC games, at least for 4 answer and 4, there was a boost on your left trigger, was your like standard boost, and you could like vary the intensity of your boost to like vary your height in the air. That is something that this game does not have, and it bums me out. But like that meant that every mech could hover if you were feathering the trigger well enough. By like if you feathered your boost on your left trigger exactly, you could maintain your height perfectly, and it basically functioned like the tetrapod legs function in this game. And then the right trigger was your actual boost, which was your quick boost. And then that could be pressed a very specific way to get a second stage quick boost, which is a faster version of the boost. And then you actually had your weapons on the shoulders. A mix of like the shoulders and face buttons.
Okay. So would you say they've done a lot of streamlining for this control scheme?
Yeah, I would say so. This is a much more, I mean, it's explicitly a more like modern FromSoft, like Souls adjacent control scheme, and that like all of your attacks, everything you do with your hands is tied to the bumpers. And then like, you know, the jump button is where people associate jump buttons with being. And then, you know, there is a like modern logic to these control schemes. So yeah, that is my controls take.
Yeah, I think control, like in terms of mapping, I think it seems more standard, like with the dodging stuff notwithstanding. But yeah, it was interesting, like how it kind of, my first mission as someone who hadn't played this series, it almost felt like replicating the experience of the time when the guy gets in the robot for the first time and they're kind of not fully in control of it, because it's just like I was dodging at random instances. I was like, okay, I'm getting around, I'm killing these enemy pilots and I'm doing well, but it's like there's like a kind of like a chaotic, like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing kind of thing, where I'm just like
constantly maxing out my generator.
Yeah, exactly. And I have no idea how like most of the weapons should actually be used. So I'm just like, I'm spamming stuff when it's off cooldown. I'm already out of ammo. Okay, well, I guess I'll just switch to my like sword and still get it done, like still destroy this helicopter. And like just learning how to look at the game, even of just like, here's this like really dense reticle. You're not really doing any like right stick aiming at all, really, but it's just about like, how are you locking on? How are you holding down certain buttons to make sure that you can like multi-fire rockets and stuff instead of having it seek one target? Things like that I thought was like even from the get-go. It's like, I have no idea how any of this works, but I'm doing well enough that it doesn't matter so far. But so it was interesting to have that experience, like just from the get-go, in a way that feels like a lot more games would have you do a lot of the training stuff they make you do. Well, they don't make you do, like that they put later on, when it's like, here's all the systems mechanics. That none of that is surfaced immediately, and they kind of just said, like, learn by doing for a while, and then we'll like suss a lot of this out specifically.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, I would just like to ask like a quick clarifying question about something you said there. Oh fuck, I completely lost it. My bad. Continue.
I was done. But
I feel like a good place to start with getting to grips with it is that tutorial boss, the first mission's first boss, because I will say I died more to that than anything else in the chapter. I had a far easier time beating the final chapter 1 boss than that helicopter. And I think it's all because I didn't know, for instance, I did not know that you could swing the sword more than once. You know, so it's like you swing the sword and then you have this big cooldown, but if you just press the button 2 times, then you can do like a combo attack and all of this stuff that like would have been great, but it is that from thing of just throwing you into a pretty intense boss right away. And like really without, I don't know, I thought, oh, I'm supposed to die to this one and I'm actually doing pretty well for a boss you're supposed to die to. And then it turned out, nope, you weren't supposed to die to it. You do have to beat it. How I would say probably took me like a dozen times, maybe. How'd y'all fare against that first one?
They took me about 3 or 4 tries, but I definitely had the like, okay, I actually need to think about using the space, because it's like the way this game works a lot of the time, it almost reminds me of Yakuza, where a lot of the time it's just like you get into battles with fodder enemies and you can just press whatever, like you throw your hands at the controller and do whatever you want. And like these enemies will just get mowed down immediately. And so like when you get to an actual enemy that they want you to pay attention to, like the way you approach combat changes completely, in that like, oh, I need to use all these buildings for cover. I need to consider like, okay, I have my attack ranges, they have their attack ranges. It looks like they're going to be operating at this distance, and I need to like kind of lead my shots. Like, oh, I fire my sword and I need to back off for a while because I can't do anything at close range, right? And so like recalibrating my brain to think about like, oh, okay, this I actually need to take this part of it seriously. It took me a couple tries, but yeah, like that helicopter, because I feel like there were multiple moments in this chapter where I was like, oh, is this the chapter 1 boss that everyone was talking about? And this was like the first instance, and every instance up until the actual boss, I was like, oh, that wasn't as bad as everyone made it out to be.
There is a comment from, excuse me, let me find it. Frog Heaven, who says, a word I keep coming back to as I play AC6 is disorientation. At their best, I think From's games foster a sense of fumbling confusion that slowly coalesces into a foggy understanding. That fog is what seems to drive the more voracious to data mine the hell out of the game. But I don't want answers, I want a moment of poetic and unexpected realization. This is the reason I'm reading it. Your sword is the key to the aerial boss. Which I think is so cool, that eventually you realize, like, my gun is not going to do it. You know, like, I can shoot at this all I want. It does not do enough damage quickly enough for me to, like, outlast this. And so at some point, you just have to boost at that helicopter and slash the hell out of it.
Well, it's specifically the gun doesn't do enough stagger damage, because I think that like a lot of like people I've seen struggling with Balteus, like the chapter 1 boss, are not leaning into the amount that you can completely lock that boss down if you stagger them consistently. Balteus can be like completely shut down if you are aggressive enough. And I think that like that is what that first like helicopter boss teaches you, is that like, at least for me, if you're underneath it, its targeting systems can't keep track of you. Like, you can use the buildings for cover, and using the buildings for cover is great, but that is a temporary reprieve versus, like, learning how to move within its specific targeting range to, like, completely disable its weapons. Because, like, that is your strength, is staying close and staying within, like, the, you know, and that's also true of enemies, too, because, like, I think a lot of people have been talking about the targeting system in this game and, like, struggling with the targeting system, or, like, having trouble, like, keeping track of enemies in this game. And that's because I think a lot of people haven't changed their like the targeting system their mech is equipped with, because like that changes how your targeting speed works in the same way that like enemies can target you at different rates at different ranges, and like you can kind of feel that out as you go. And I think that first helicopter boss is like a really good teacher of that lesson, that like once you're in that machine, that minigun won't hurt you, and those missiles are going to like swing around you and like go from behind you, and that's terrific. I really love it.
It was almost like a process of relearning like a lot of the Dark Souls thing of like head into the eye of the storm. Don't try to like avoid it, right? Where it's like the philosophy of roll forward, because their attack is going to hit in front of them. So if you roll into them, you'll be behind, or like your invincibility frames will actually work. Whereas here it is just like what Ren said of like the missiles will like almost deploy for a second and then charge you. So in there, you have to charge forward, which repeatedly, like the answer to a lot of the bosses is just like, be more aggressive and like basically overwhelm them instead of playing it safe. And so like, yeah, a lot of that first boss basically teaches you how to approach bosses very differently than a lot of the regular enemies, where it's a lot of circle strafing and making sure that like you're dodging, turret attacks as you're approaching them. But then, as you're playing it, you just like learn almost how to like change your thinking about what you're doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I totally agree. Although I will say this comment from Nick from Atlanta, I also think is kind of true. They write, this game feels like playing Dark Souls again. By that, I mean it feels like from completely throughout a lot of the lessons they learned from Dark Souls 1 through 3 about how to teach players how to play a difficult but fair game. The basic enemies are generally so inconsequential that any bad players aren't punished, which makes the bosses that do punish bad behaviors seem more unfair. I've only beat 2 bosses so far, but neither one has felt like a victory of learning and skill rather than simply being a bit lucky. I do think that there is something in that, like, you can basically fumble your way through every enemy up until a boss and then suddenly realize that you, like, don't know how to move, which I think was a lot of our experiences getting to that first helicopter. But I do think the fact that they put a checkpoint right before the boss essentially means, like, this is your learning time. Like I think this game is actually kinder than the Souls games have been in the past, in terms of just like, there's no run back. We're going to give you all your health backs and all your ammo back when you die. Here's a checkpoint right before the boss fight starts. Just do it again.
It only becomes a game of real attrition if you're going for an S rank on a mission, because with S ranks you cannot do like the like chapter, you cannot use checkpoints. You have to restart the mission from the beginning in most cases. I believe with the final mission of chapter 1, you can do 1 checkpoint and still receive a S rank if you are like really clean against Balteus. But like, I think that like a lot of the frustration I've seen against like this like first boss, I think comes from like misunderstanding or like not vibing with what it's trying to teach you, which is that like this is how this game works, and also like this is how this genre works. I think a lot of this like feel stuff you're talking about in terms of like really chewing through these like early game enemies is as much a like symptom of game design as it is like genre convention. Armored Core is like closer, or at least modern Armored Core is like closer to a Super Robot series, and that like you are supposed to be cutting through grunts. That is like your role, but it takes the thematic like core and like the thematic ideas underpinning a lot of real robot series, which is like series like BattleTech, which are like interested in how mechs plug into actual war machines, versus something like Gundam, which is about like a cool kid getting in a cool robot and doing damn well. And this is closer to using like borrowing elements from both like genre standards in a way that like I really like. And I really like the fact that a lot of the enemies aren't that dangerous on their own, but like a lot of the better level design here, like I think Operation Wall Climber absolutely rules. I think it's a really sick level, because that is a level that teaches you that like this is a war of attrition. You are fighting like fights of attrition in this game. If you want to be doing well, versus boss fights like the helicopter and Balteus, which is like you can just like rerun this specific sequence until you have the rhythm down.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting because it does become, it's almost like a pacing mechanism for a run-based game where it's like those early enemies almost act as like okay, I can get through this first part really easily, but it's like, yeah, everyone does, but it kind of sets you up to like, okay, if I can just get the boss down, then I can do this run clean and then like get that S rank. And so it just feels like once you start replaying levels, it's more about like, yes, I can destroy all the enemies really easily, but can I do that quickly and better than I did last time? And so like it just becomes like the trick becomes doing it well versus doing it at all. And one thing that I like about this game that I kind of actually wish that a lot of other action games, like specifically Platinum stuff, did, is that they basically say, don't worry about performance the first time through, right? Like they use our checkpoints. You're going to get everything back. It doesn't matter. You're not going to get hit with like a bronze rating at the end to make you feel bad about what you did. And so like I like that it's just like for this first run, just focus on getting through. And then like you can worry about the statistics and stuff. And they also use the like fodder enemies of like, you're just we want to like gas you up a little bit before we put you in front of the boss. So I think like those enemies are relevant and they're important to like the player experience, even if, you know, they're throwaway.
I want to talk about, well, okay, before we do that, let's just talk about the story that happens in the first mission, because it's pretty simple, but I do think it will kind of frame it, where we land, our handlers, like, well, so our character is an augmented human. Ren, what does that mean?
So basically, okay, one, this is like every version of Armored Core, like every generation of Armored Core generally has like plays with its basic themes and ideas. And like changes up like how the underlying systems of the world work. And so like it's similar to Gundam in this way, where like new types are a specific thing in the universal century of Gundam. But there are people like new types in a bunch of different Gundam series and who fulfill the like narrative function of what a new type is. And so augmented humans here are doing the work that something like a Lynx would do in Armored Core 4 Answer. So basically, an augmented human is someone who has undergone a particular kind of surgery that allows them to interface with mechs in a specific way. And this is like, again, a little bit of a genre standard. It goes all the way back to 0080 in Zeta Gundam, when you have cyber new types, are what they're called, which are basically people who have been cybernetically augmented and traumatized into developing the ability to psychically connect with their mech, such that instead of, you know, a new type in Gundam is basically someone who, instead of just piloting a mech, they can extend their sense of empathy and their sense of like proprioception, like the knowledge of like where your limbs are in space, to the body of the mech as opposed to their own body, such that they have better reaction time, they're able to move more fluidly, and they're better pilots. And so augmented humans are clearly this version of Armored Core's take on what a new type is, or like the underlying like requirement to become an AC pilot as opposed to someone who just uses an MT, which are like the smaller mechs in this game. And like Iron-Blooded Orphans, the second to most recent Gundam series, there is a physical toll for that, which is, again, pulling from a lot of like sci-fi genre standards, like the Spartan program in Halo, in which like even that follows like a similar pattern where first generation augmented mostly died but are the best of the best because they underwent like these specific augmentation processes. That's why handler Walter freaks out when you meet Sula. And fourth generation augmented is basically like the quickest and dirtiest way of augmenting someone, such that like they basically lose the ability to ambulate and can only pilot the mech. And so effectively you're fighting for your body back.
Okay, that's so there's a question from Hammer Parsa that gets at some of this, where they just say, I'm confused at how mech piloting works. Is every AC pilot a messed up human in a lab tube ready to get deployed to combat, or is it just 621? Are they actually in the mech, or are they controlling it remotely? What about the enemies? They talk to each other and react when they see you. So I think you answered a lot of that, but I do think for an Armored Core newbie, it is not totally clear, you know, that it's just like, I just know I am an augmented human, but not too much beyond that. And your character never speaks. Like you do not get any motivation from the pilot that you are playing. You are essentially experiencing the story from a bunch of different factions talking at you.
Yeah, and I think like the kind of condensed like metaphor here is like how the machines that we pilot, like how war machines kind of affect our minds and how we like change ourselves to become them, right? To say like something like a new type could do anything, but they have been assigned to like their biggest use is as pilots for robots. And then there's a lot of work done in like how different robot, like, okay, so we can scale the machines to adapt to the new types. And so we make them so powerful and adaptable to the mental frequencies of new types that we start crushing their minds as a result, where it's like the psycho energy in something like Zeta and Double Zeta is just, it makes this pilot slowly go insane. And that acts as like, yeah, if you are behind like the view of a tank for long enough, you're just going to go insane. Like that weapons change how we behave.
Right, and it's specifically like how they instrumentalize like specific people. Like the very obvious metaphor of the new type is like, you know, it's basically Gundam is Tomino asking, what if there was a radically new way of being a person? And the answer to that question, but for Tomino, is, well, the state would turn those people into the best kind of gun you can make.
Right. We would squander any potential that we have as a species because we are not set up to become better people, because everything else is like pushing us down. And this game is already very clearly and explicitly like, I think it's really, really clever, even if it's also very basic, of like how the first few missions essentially get you to function as like, oh, I'm just doing jobs for anyone, and I'm like a mercenary without any real affiliation. And that's kind of weird as you start, like, you know, you take on jobs to fight corporations that you were just doing jobs for, and they're not like subtle about the fact that like, oh, you're taking on the Rubicon Liberation Front. I wonder what those guys are up to. Like, are we secretly the bad guys? Is very, very obviously being set up here.
I don't think it's secret. Those flight logs of RLF fighters are like explicitly like, oh yeah, listen, I just wanted my friends to stop dying from workplace injuries. Like that's what I wanted people to stop getting sick.
Right, and it is immediately contextualizing your actions as like, yeah, like if you think about this for any amount of time, it's really messed up what you're doing, right? And but we're still kind of in the like default, like, I'm just a mech guy. I don't know. I just take jobs and I kill people and I just do what I'm told, man.
Well, I mean, this is the strength of Armored Core as a series, right? Is that like the games feel so good because they are able to like effectively give the player that experience of depersonalization and distance from their own body, and distance from their own body and closeness to a different kind of body, right? To learn how to pilot one of these mechs very intimately is like to learn a different way of moving that like separates you from other people, which is why, like, you know, Armored Core 4 Answer, one of the previous Armored Core games, there are a couple of routes that game can go. Basically, you can either choose to maintain the current corporate establishment at the end of that game. That's option one. You can choose to side with a semi-revolutionary organization who ends up just integrating themselves into the corporate system by the end. Or you can burn it all down and just literally shoot the ships that on which like the most of humanity is living.
Yeah. Isn't the bad ending you kill like 100 million people?
That's a conservative estimate. That's probably the good ending is probably closer to that estimate in terms of like total damage done unto the world as like part of functioning in this system. And so like this is like the core question of the series. And like, you know, chapter 1, the ending of chapter 1 is like leaning into that as hard as you can. I am like absolutely in love with like, listen, I love this genre, and I think that Armored Core 6 is doing this genre to a truly exceptional level.
Yeah, the story is I'm kind of surprised by consistently.
It's I mean, I just like I love I did not know that so much of it was hearing the local chat of the people that you were fighting. Like that was such a wonderful surprise in me playing it, because they can just do so many things with that, you know, like the amount of just kind of like feel and tone that they're able to get out of the people that you're fighting screaming about you is incredible and totally something that like Souls does not do.
Yeah, and like the writing is very clear because it needs to be, right? Like, because there are versions of this, like a lot of shooters and stuff will have the thing, you're just running through hallways and people are talking over you and they're trying to get exposition across. But it's like here they are like they are so very clear. Everyone is so very clear about what, like they give you the most distilled version of their argument basically, instead of giving you a bunch of like exposition. And it's because it's like it needs to register as you're like mowing down a bunch of turrets and like fodder enemies and there's like music kicking in. But they write them in such a way that it pierces that kind of like your flow. And so you like it is striking how much they're like, we need the strongest, clearest version of this line to get across our point. And they're very effective about doing that in a way that I think a lot of games that use the like, people are talking while you're doing stuff, I think can kind of lean in on like, this is where we pour onto them. And this game is being much more selective and concise about what it's saying.
Well, another thing that like to pull on the FromSoft's most recent lineage is that like other FromSoft games do this, right? Bosses have barks that they say during their fights, and you know, one of the ways that FromSoft has done this historically is that like bosses have multiple potential barks that they run through, such that you can fight a boss 10 times, and on that 10th time, you may just hear something new from them. And Armored Core does this similarly, with the expectation that like you continue going back after you've beaten them the first time. And I think this is why you don't get this feeling as much with, you know, the Dark Souls games, is that one, you know, your standard fodder enemies aren't talking to you in that game. But even the boss enemies, once you have killed them, you don't hear from them again. And here, when you're going back to these missions to replay them, whether it be for, you know, credits to buy all of the parts, which I did because I'm an insane person, or, you know, to just like try and like score chase and get the S rank, like you're going to hear slightly different versions of these lines, and those slightly different versions like do contain a lot of like interesting narrative stuff. There are things that like V4 Rusty can say to you that are like a bit narratively relevant, that like you can just totally miss if you only play through that mission like one time, but also like are not so essential as to completely like have the plot lose coherence if you don't get them.
Right. I think there are a lot of details of like, oh, when Sola talks to you and you have that fight, it's like, I don't know exactly what the relationship is, but I know something's up. And it's like the gist of it is this guy is basically another you in a way of just like, I was also used, like spat out by this system, and but not as explicitly, but it's like, he talks about like, oh, I must have killed, like, where did the other ones go? Right. I must have killed one. I wonder if I killed any of them. Right. And like, that's a very clear, like, this guy has been through the ringer that you are going through in some way and is like very cynical about it. Right. And he just happens to be on the other side now.
Mm-hmm. I want to read some comments about the story here. Malcolm H said, I definitely feel like the bad guy, especially when all the people I'm killing sound like the main cast out of a mecha anime, while the people I'm working for sound so cold and straight out of a military game. Guess, fighting the Liberation Front. Even if you don't get anything else, that feels bad. It doesn't feel like a cool thing to do to kill a Liberation Front. Let's see. Oops, I just scrolled down. Jared Pierce said, I'm surprised by how much I'm enjoying the story so far. It's much more direct, but I still get the feeling that this war has been going on for a while. I also like that you are only shown things directly related to your missions, as if 621 is only conscious for those moments, and anything in between is being kept from the player.
I believe that is literally true. That is quite literally narratively true. That's why the game opens with "Wake up, 621." Is because you are effectively like in suspended animation whenever you are not doing violence, because your body is effectively like you are effectively paralyzed. And so that is just true.
Here's something that Ryan McInnes says. Wake up, dog. You're 621. We're going to call you Raven now. Got that gun, 13? Do you think we'll get more names by the end of the game?
Yeah. It's interesting how much they like, it's almost like increasingly alienating, right? Of just like, oh, you're this thing now when you're with these guys, and then we're gonna, like, when you're rolling with the other mercenary group and you have the two handlers, they call you G13, and they're kind of talking about the previous G13 in a way of just like, oh, you think you can live up to this guy, and they're like, you're almost adapting like roles depending on the mission. And so it means like, well, who am I really? And then it feels like they're kind of pushing you towards, well, you can kind of be whoever, right?
This is again, more cool genre stuff. Is that like this is in a lot of ways the Gundam standard, where like every Gundam protagonist is associated with not just the identity of being the Gundam pilot, but also like to be the Gundam pilot in Gundam is to like be a symbol, is to be a very specific kind of symbol about like the relationship between like power and the state. That is what the Gundam like symbolically represents. And the thing I find interesting here is that like AC6 seems to understand that mechs are iconographic in that way and like take on symbolic power. When I see White Glint, when I see the name White Glint, that evokes something to me immediately. And the thing is that like it is standard in mech fiction to like have a bunch of different names for the same mech. Char is Char Aznable. He is the Red Comet. His mech is its specific serial number, right? Like these bodies take on all of these identities and like so much power and meaning over time. And like a lot of the best mech fiction and like a lot of my favorite Gundam stories are about going backwards and like interrogating what that identity and like thing is. That's why 0080 War in the Pocket and Oath MS Team are so excellent as series, as like Gundam series, is that they are explicitly about interrogating what the Gundam as a symbol means. In the case of Oath MS Team, it's the question of like what happens when you turn the symbol of, hope and power back into just another kind of gun. And then, 0080 War in the Pocket is about like the commodification and commercialization of war machines and like what that does to children. And so like this is playing with the identity and iconographic power that mechs take on is again like really central genre stuff that I think is being done exceptionally well in Armored Core 6.
Sean Mills writes again about the story and the kind of other people that you're fighting. The mission against the AC tester really imparts to the player how cold and merciless these corporations are. His final words, "I just wanted a call sign of my own," make you question what you're doing in this world. I think something that this game is doing that other From games don't is like it is invested in making you at certain moments feel very powerful. Which is not, it's like being good at like Elden Ring or Dark Souls or whatever can kind of be a power fantasy where you're like, oh, these big bosses are so hard and I'm killing them. But what you don't get in any of those games is missions where you are flying through and people are like, oh crap, he's here, we're all going to die. Like that is not really a tone that you get. And I think it's so like the mission where you're taking on the mining ship and you're hearing them just scramble and basically like blow up half of the ship in order to stop you from blowing up the rest of the ship. And it like doesn't even slow you down. There's this feeling of like, you are so good at your job in this that like even my best runs in the other From games, I'm never like, those people are scared of me. And I think that's a really interesting tone that this game is like giving a lot.
I mean, they are people and you are a gun who just showed up. And like there are different things happening, Surreal, as you were saying.
Yeah,
sorry.
no, it's like on it's almost like on a sliding scale of guilt almost in that like I think it does a really good job of doing the like, oh, the mechs are really cool, but it's like the wow cool robot thing, right? Where it's like constantly it is to me that is my favorite mission just because of how like the way it plays with scale and that thing being just this giant thing that you are scaling. But then also as you're having this like really powerful moment of like, oh, this is really cool, I'm scaling this thing. It's just you are this you realize how much of a source of panic you are to everyone on that thing, and everyone is running away, and you're like you're a tyrant, and like if you didn't know that by now, like you are absolutely just this destructive force in a way that like they're having you customize your mech and they're telling you like, yeah, good job, G13, but then like every time you're out there it you feel like, yeah, I don't want to, this is really weird.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the other thing that's like worth noting is that that is again a pull from series history, because Armored Core has often been about the relationship between ACs and what are called arms forts. You know, in earlier games, the Strider would have been called an arms fort. One of the first missions that ends Chapter 1, actually, of Armored Core 4 Answer has you take down a arms fort called the Spirit of Mother Will, which is a ship that just like is a construction that completely dwarfs your mech. You look like nothing compared to it. And the way you destroy it is by destroying every one of its missile bays. And basically, you can't actually destroy the thing, but you can set enough fires internally by destroying their weapon system that eventually the whole thing melts down. And so like, that is again like really cool stuff that is like at the core of this. Like Armored Core 6 is, if you've played previous Armored Core games, you play Armored Core 6 and are like, damn, this is just a good Armored Core game. They just did another one of the. I am desperate for more people to like do the work of going back to some of the older ones, and like 4 Answer in particular, to be like, oh cool, this is just what this series is. This is not an aberration. This is just like it working as intended.
I mean, I have been like clawing at the calendar, needing to record this so I could keep playing the next chapters of this game, and I'm sure I'm going to beat them tomorrow, and then I'll have like 6 days, and so maybe I'll just start playing 4 Answer because I like need my fix. Yeah,
I've put a disgusting amount of time into this game. Like I said, I have bought every part available that we of to the point in the game that we have played, and several of those parts cost $400,000 on their own, which is an S rank payout for the Balteus mission, and I've done them plenty of times because like I just love the fucking feeling of this video game. I'm enamored with it.
I think that we've talked about this game too much without talking about paint colors. Nikki B writes, I thought Baldur's Gate was a time sink for character customization, but this crushes it. I have no idea what any of the stats mean, but I spent over half of the first night playing it just making color schemes. My mech looks like a toy straight out of the 80s with neon blue and yellow and a random miscolored and dirty left arm. Then I saw the sticker customization card at the end and had to stop myself, otherwise I would have been at it all night. What do y'all's mechs, what is the character of them? What are you going for?
I'm very specifically going for one of my favorite mechs, which is this guy, the RX-78 Mudrock, which is from Zionic Front. He's like a modification of the original Gundam that can hover. So he's like the most armored core Gundam because he has like hover treads and stuff and shoulder cannons. So it's like a purple, white, and orange scheme. And I wasn't worried. I was worrying about like how my mech looked eventually until I realized that that's not a thing you can really prioritize if you want the game to feel the way you want it to. But I've been tinkering around with it, like the look of everything, because this game does very much make you want to customize your mech a lot for both gameplay and cosmetic reasons. And I'm usually someone who basically hits random on the character creator in most games until, you know, I find one like, okay, that's fine. Not the like, oh, I've really made my OC, or like I've made this very specific thing. I don't spend much time in character creators, but I've been spending a lot of time like tweaking the look and the colors of my mech a lot in this game.
Ren, you've posted a beautiful picture of your mech in our chat.
Thank you. That is the mech currently called White Raven V2, which is the mech that I used for a lot of my grinding through Chapter 1 for like money. But then the mech that I used in my first playthrough was the V1. And the difference between the V1 and the V2 was that the V1 had tetrapod legs, and so was more based around hovering and like outmaneuvering enemies from the air, versus the V2, which is about using reverse jointed legs to like jump around the battlefield very effectively. And so the V1 had a predominantly pink color scheme with white accents. And the V2 has a predominantly white color scheme with pink accents. And so basically the kind of pigmentation, if ravens and like a lot of like black birds receive like the gene that changes their pigmentation to white, they're like feather pigmentation. It also changes a lot of like the accents and like details of their bodies to be pink. And so I was trying to model it loosely off of like a white raven as both a callback to White Glint from previous games in the series, and also like playing around with the idea of like what that call sign like actually means for this character.
That rules. Aaron Roberts says, I have 7 hours of gameplay so far. About 3.5 of that is painting and emblem designing. Here's a question about the emblems. When you change parts, the emblems go away. Mm-hmm. Are they permanently erased, or if you like put the head back on, do they keep the emblem that they have? Because I have been loving changing all the parts of my mech around, but because I've been doing that so much, it does feel like I don't want to spend as much time like customizing each individual part, because I'm like, I might only use this head for one mission.
Are you saving your schematics?
No, because I'm dumb.
You should save your schematics so you can go back to like earlier versions of your mech if you need them for a different situation. Like,
okay,
the V2 will probably become something else, but like, you know, one of the things that Surreal gestured at when we were talking about the first mission in this game is that like you could in fact beat this game with the base mech. You could handily beat this video game with the mech that they give you in chapter 1. But you can also similarly, just like the Souls games, tailor how it feels to your specific experience and to the specific boss you're going to be fighting. And so like the particular like equipment set that I use for Balteus will probably be just as useful for a later fight that is involving like a shield heavy enemy. And so like it can be really useful to save your schematics and your different like builds, like as you find ones that like you really end up vibing with.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite things about this game is how like a lot of you have this store that you can buy a bunch of components in, but your progress is not necessarily linear, even though you're like you can do things like buy equipment with better like stats where all the stats are blue, but that's not necessarily going to be an improvement, because like different weapons have different, you know, cadences and things like that. And it was really like a lot of the like VR tutorial missions that they give you, where they give you like the pre-made builds of like, this is a really lightweight build that can just boost all the time, versus something like, here's a double jointed that is really good at jumping. And then I realized like, why is that better than the one that can just be like a hummingbird the whole time? Except there's a boss where like being able to jump really high when something is coming at you is really relevant. And then like, quadruped is just like this hovering mass. And then like you can drift with the tank treads, and just like how different the game can feel depending on your mech. Definitely makes it so that like you're not necessarily, it's not like an RPG where you're selling all of your junk equipment and then upgrade, like slowly getting like a better version of your build. And I think a lot of the Balteus fight is about like getting you to think about your build is not static. In the way that like, okay, you're going to need plasma weapons to get through. You are not going to beat this fight unless you have a counter here. And they're teaching you that very early on, to say that like, don't think of your mech as something that you are constantly improving, but instead something that you're adapting to the situation. And that's why they like, anytime you die, you can go right into the assembly thing and like customize your build. So you're encouraged to buy everything just so that you have more options, not so that like, I have the gear with the best stats. And like that is a thing that they're very particular about, making sure that you understand as a player.
Yeah, and like the other note being that like everything you buy in this game, I don't know if y'all have noticed this, but sells back for the exact same price that you bought it at. And so if you want to like swap out your build on the fly, like between missions, like you can completely sell everything you've got and like have a whole new, completely like kitted out mech within like a couple of minutes. I think that's a very kind quality of life thing.
And it makes it difficult to judge, like, you know, if you're going to put the like control bullet on like a review or something, it makes it so hard to judge that, because like there are so many like very specific things about the feel that you can just straight up modify completely. So something like, oh, I have a heavy grenade launcher, but like, I wish I didn't have to stand still every time I fired it. And it's like, yeah, you can totally build around that. If you want to have a tank turret build that absorbs the recoil as you're moving, you can totally do that. If you want more boost, you can make a really lightweight frame that makes it so that you're flying almost constantly, right? And so like you are very much encouraged to say like, I wish the game felt like this, and you can also tailor your build to like that specifically, because every aspect of how that feel works is just infinitely tweakable.
Yeah.
Now, I hear you and respect what you're saying. Now, let me tell you about the build that I made that seemed to break the game, which was very simple, but just like around... It was like after the first time I did the wall mission, I just made the lightest build I possibly could that could hold 2 shotguns and 2 10-rack missile launchers. And that just demolished everything. I mean, I have heard people talking about what a wall Balteus was for them. I beat Balteus the second try with just 2 shotguns and 20 missiles. And it's like, the shotguns are so strong and so fast in burst damage, and if your mech is really quick, you can stay on their ass so much. I mean, the boss on top of the wall, which I can't remember exactly what it's called, but like with 2 shotguns and 10 missile launchers or 20 missiles, that thing goes down in like 20 seconds. Like it just disappears.
That is another boss that is like, you have to stagger. Like, that is a boss that it like basically teaches you that if you are not staggering enemies, you are not going to get this game in a lot of ways, because like that whole boss he's going to take no damage until you stagger him, which is very easy because he just sits there and waits for you to shoot him in the back for a while. And so if you have a relatively agile mech, like it's that fight like goes down like really fast. I think my build is similar, Jacob, in that it like relies on dual SMGs and like the dual machine guns, the handheld machine guns, always firing 2 of them constantly and just like shredding people. And then of course my post Balteus build involves a pile bunker. Which have you used the pile bunker?
Oh yeah,
best weapon in the game.
Okay, yeah,
have you, Surreal?
No, I is it like a missile launcher?
No, it is. So you remember the trailer for when the mech has the spike and it jams the spike into the other one and it fires through and it pulls the spike out bloody?
No, yeah. I do remember that.
It's just like weapon. Yeah, what if you could drive a railroad spike into another mech?
It's like the big O fist, right? Where he like punches things and he has like an oscillator in the back that just like basically punches his arm, and it is like the big hammering.
So it has 0 range and a very long wind up, but like if they're staggered, it don't matter.
Yeah. And is that a
like,
shoulder weapon or like a hand, like a left hand?
It's a hand weapon, but I for my specific build, I put it in the weapon bay. And so I can switch weapons on the fly, which is also a great feeling in this game. The feeling of being like, actually, you know what? I don't need a shoulder weapon is like such a good fucking... I don't need a shield. I don't need a shoulder weapon. Just give me a different gun. Is a really, really satisfying feeling to be like, okay, I have locked down the specific way that I can like fight through this encounter. Actually, the way that like... sorry, please.
Oh, I was just gonna say, that being said, the spike is heavy. You know, it's like, unlike the sword, it is like your mech needs to be able to carry this presumably 30-ton piece of metal that you're like driving into something else. And so then you do have to spec to like be able to hold that.
Yeah, I had to, in order to have the build that I have for like that I've been grinding chapter 1 with, I have pulled every ounce of power out of the generator and leg combination that I have, where I am right at the edge of my meters on both meters. And like, I could switch to a different generator and have more room to play with, but like, I don't need it. This is the best possible generator for the specific build I'm doing. And realizing that like numerically, I have found the thing that I need to in order to get the maximum amount of power out of this body is such a good and cool feeling.
And it's like realizing that the upgrades aren't about like a linear progression, but it's more about arriving dead center at the exact thing that you want.
Yeah.
Kelly Malkowitz in the on our Patreon says there's literally no better feeling than using the weapon bay upgrade to keep a melee weapon on your back shoulder and pulling it out when you stagger an enemy for a big charge melee attack. I feel like playing the game this way makes it specifically just harder because I don't have access to a second missile array, but I don't care. Big laser sword.
Yeah, big laser sword.
But we should note, you can only unlock the weapon bay OS upgrade by interacting with the arena, which I feel like you might see and assume it's kind of inessential. You know, it's like a couple missions in, you unlock the arena where you can just fight individual mechs. And you know, it's like, oh, is that just like another form of training room? But it's not, and you get resources there that you can't get anywhere else in the game.
Yeah, that is definitely like a thing where I know that like there are things on the other side of like this chapter that I need to play more of, like the arena. Like I bought this game on launch day and had to play like basically all of chapter 1 in like what was ended up being a surprisingly busy weekend. So I've not invested as much time in the arena and other, like I haven't been grinding chapter 1 like Ren has. But like I'm excited to see like how, because like I think a lot of the fun in a game with this kind of customization is seeing what extremes you can get to, right? Of like, yeah, I'm not going to go for the all-rounder build, which is all I really had time for, of like, oh, I have like a railgun maybe, but like, and then some shoulder rockets, but seeing the like things like a 2 shotgun build or like something with a 2 weapon build, like that's the stuff that I want to get into as I like play more of the game. And that's what's going to make the build feel more personal.
Will Dane says, have y'all tried the boost kick? Closing distance quickly with a staggering kick changed the way I play. Follow it up with a stab or freehand punch for a devastating combo. In a game full of guns and missiles, I still gravitate to bruiser builds. I will say I have been just trying to make my builds weirder as I've like finished it and be like, let's just see if this works. And running with very big, very slow weapons, like if I mostly have like grenade launchers or whatever, the kick suddenly becomes about ammo efficiency, where it's like, yeah, look, I could use a grenade launcher shot on this like one very weak mech, or I could just slam into it and like smash it into a wall, and it rules. I love it. I guess we could talk about the specific missions more, but I feel like the first couple missions are not that notable. I don't know. What's the first like story mission post the first one where y'all were like, oh, there's kind of stuff going on here?
I think for me, it was definitely like the one where you're collecting dog tags for the first time and you're kind of getting battle data about this one mech. And like the idea that like, oh, you're basically getting story through these battle logs of like, this is what this mech was capable of. And like hearing about like, oh, like make sure you just, you know, where this is just a collection mission, and then having the people arrive that are like from the Liberation Front. And that's like kind of the first instance where you get like that characterization from the Liberation Front of like, oh, you're the bad guy.
There's also some really clever like in-universe tutorialization in there where one of the logs very early talks about someone's FCS system, flight control system, being unable to keep up with Gun 4 Rusty. And so like that is like the game very quickly reminding you that like, hey, listen, like change your target. This is like, I'm going to keep harping on this until I see people doing it more. Change your targeting system. Change your targeting system into something that makes sense for you. Because I think so many people are losing lock-ons and like losing their ability to track targets because they are using targeting systems that are ill-built for the ranges that their mech is fighting at. And I think that like little bit of like in-universe tutorialization is really clever, and like one of the reasons that I really like that mission.
Yeah, I mean, I like that one because Rusty, I feel like, is one of the first characters you meet who you're like, oh, this is like a cool guy, you know, like he's not just a kind of like military lunatic, because it's like you have your handler who's just kind of, you know, completely seemingly kind of craven. And then you have a mission where you attack a dam and you have 2 other guys who are helping you. They're like allies, but they are aggressively unpleasant, where it's like, boy, I don't feel good about fighting on the same side as these. But then you meet Rusty, and not only does his ship look cool as hell, he's like very, I don't know, he seems genuinely nice to you. He seems like cool to hang around. He has a sword that you cannot get. He has some kind of like spinny sword weapon that you see him attack the boss with. Also, amazing moment when he leaves halfway through that boss fight. And it's just like, figure it out. Have fun. But then, like immediately after that mission, you get to like go and find out more about Rusty, and it is both you're finding out things about like how good he is and how scary he is to fight, but also you're finding stuff that he's like a defector, right? That the kind of like some of the logs imply that like he used to be with the Liberation Front, and now he's fighting them. Is that right?
Unsure.
They're scrambled, but it definitely it seems. I am curious if we'll hear more about Rusty and if that will do anything, because it seems, it seems like they're kind of putting him in a gray area here.
Oh yeah, he's definitely like set up as a rival or like white. So Armored Core 4 answer. There are a couple of mechs that you hang out with several times throughout your time playing that game who like support you on missions, and those mechs are all like plot relevant and like show up in different roles in like various factions. That is the famous White Glint being the best example. One of the sickest mech designs of all time. And so I assume that V4 Rusty is going to be in a similar way to White Glint, a like recurring rival figure who you meet at the very beginning of the game in a slightly like altered circumstances.
Let's talk about some of those other mechs that you get in that in the mission where you're picking up the combat logs. You also meet what's her name? The one who's there, like one of the logs is like, at least she got out of here, and then you have to fight her.
Yeah.
Gosh, I can't remember who it is, but it seems, it's kind of like a Liberation Front icon. It seems like, right?
She's an AC pilot. Yeah, she's one of the Liberation Front's like few dedicated AC pilots, as opposed to someone who's using an MT. And so like she is a big deal insofar as like she is an AC pilot willing to work with them at all.
Mm-hmm. And then, weirdly, almost immediately after, you just do a mission for the Liberation Front, which I thought was both, funny in terms of like, okay, you are a mercenary, you have no loyalties, you'll do anything, but also like that they will hire you, I think is fascinating. And, when you start, you kind of get a message that's like, hey, glad to have you here. Maybe don't, side with us, don't kill us next time. But just like, I like that they show that it's like the Liberation Front isn't like so kind of ethically hardline that they're not going to hire mercenaries, because like that's just what they got to do.
Right. Like you are not just a mercenary. You live in a world in which mercenaryism is like commonplace, right? Like that everyone is this way, that like no one has any real allegiances to like friend today, enemy tomorrow kind of thing. And so like, yeah, they do a really good job of making that feeling feel jarring.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's Armored Core, baby. But also is like really great setup for what I assume are going to be the multiple paths in this game, because like previous Armored Core games have multiple story paths. This one will too. The question is whether or not you can access those story paths in the first playthrough. In Armored Core 4 Answer, there are entire like progress routes through that game that you can only unlock on New Game Plus, which is a much easier sell for a game that is 4 hours long, if played properly, as opposed to this, which is definitely a bit longer.
And I have heard that there is new story in New Game Plus and New Game Plus Plus. So stay tuned to the Deepest Dive Part 3, where we will see if we experience those stories.
But that's like, this is all set up for, everything we're talking about is set up for the end of Chapter 1, where you begin getting contacted by Aerie, or Air, who is a Rubiconian who has new type powers, and is contacting you with her new type powers. Because being exposed to Coral has also given you new type powers.
So before we get there, I do just have to call out that Lewis K. Writes about how funny it is that one of the companies in the game is straight up called Boz. As a Scot, they write, this is just confirmation that there were no Scottish people in From Software who recognized that it just sounds like you're calling it balls. Anyway, Ren, what does new type powers mean?
New type powers in this case means like psychic abilities.
Clairvoyance kind of thing.
Yeah, in Gundam, new types are people who can, again, like extend their sense of self outside of their bodies, and like have like low level psychic abilities that like grow as the series goes on, until you get to like later shows where like, To borrow a quote from a friend of mine, people are attacking planets with dead women's souls. Thank you, Dre, for that absolute all-time line from Friends of the Table's Armored Core streams. But eventually at the high end of new types, you're attacking planets with the power of dead women's souls. And very obviously here they're setting up some like basic new type powers by being exposed to coral.
Like at the lowest level, they function as like a combination of being psychic and a spider sense, right? Where your reactions are better because you can sense like, oh, he's like behind me, even though I have no way to know that. Right?
Mm-hmm. So at the kind of like, it feels like the most story flourish-y part of the game, because so far it's like your missions have been very stripped down stylistically, where it's like, even though you've been going in cool environments and like fighting cool looking things, there's nothing particularly quote unquote cinematic that the game has done. But at the end of the
human being like at all, like there are no human beings in any of these
sure scenes. And there's been nothing kind of surreal, not surreal, surreal. And then at the end of this, or what you assume is the end of this chapter 1 mission, you blow up a generator, you are bathed in coral, and suddenly there is someone talking to you in your head who you have not heard, who doesn't seem to be going through the radios like everyone else. And then you fight this big hard boss, and like she's in there the whole time talking to you, and then at the end shows you like a vision of the fires of Rubicon, which is all it's all interesting because it feels more like magical compared to everything else that has happened thus far.
Yeah, it's really sick. There's a couple like cool details there, which is that she basically synchronizes her brainwaves with yours, such that she basically like uses you as a conduit to reprogram parts of your mech. So she is the one who disables your comms systems. It is not that Balteus has taken your comms down and you can't talk to Handler Walter, or that the Coral has done it. It is that she has shut your comms down so she can actually talk to you for a fucking minute. It's really neat.
Anthony Brown says, I'm hyped for Air. I love connected consciousness stories. Who do you think Air is? I'm not sure exactly what Anthony's angle on this. It's like perhaps someone from the Liberation Front or whatever. I was liking to think of it as almost just like a voice for the planet, like that it is this like totally not aligned with a faction, but just like it is Rubicon itself somehow speaking to you, which seems appropriate because it came out of being taking a bath in all this like natural resource that they're fighting over.
And she also says, she doesn't say I'm a member of the Rubicon Liberation Front. She says I am a Rubiconian, and like uses that language very specifically, which I think is interesting. My guess is that she's an ace pilot, or a former ace pilot who died at some point like previously, and is like part of the stream of coral.
She's merged with the coral and now has fused her life force with you. Yeah, and she'll end up being like, she's the person who's going to give you a conscience, basically. It's just like, yeah, maybe you shouldn't always just do whatever other people tell you.
Yeah, it's clearly doing a Mako thing in terms of like, yes, this is a power source, but also is quite literally the distilled essence of people's heart. So yeah.
Can I tell y'all a completely random note that I took in my little notebook?
Please.
The menu music in this game sounds exactly like a track from the movie Mission Impossible Fallout. Specifically, Should You Choose to Accept It is the track name. But like, I've been hearing this menu music so much because I'm in there tinkering with my little mech parts all the time, and I just keep thinking about how it sounds like this Mission Impossible song. So please, anyone, if you have also noticed this, write in so I feel not crazy. Let's talk about the music. It's good.
It's really good.
I like it.
Really good. Oh, Jacob, I have good news for you about the previous Armored Core games and their music.
I think it is cool. Again, the From Software thing, as I know them, is there is no music and then you get to a boss and there's music. That's kind of the Dark Souls, the whatever thing. Elden Ring broke that trend, but generally it's like that's what it is. And the approach here is, I can't quite figure it out, in that it's like, it's sometimes very subtle, and sometimes in like the arena battles or the training missions, you've just got kind of a track, but it feels much more just like it's going to come in when there is something cool going on, whether that's a boss fight or just like an interesting approach to a level or whatever. And I love how like it is so low that it almost feels like it is a mech sound. You know, it doesn't really register to me as like there's music playing. It's just like there are more synths happening, and that could be coming from anywhere.
Yeah, it's really interesting, like the way this, like they compose this game very, very intently, instead of it just being like, here's the track for this section of the game, here's the track for this section. It feels like, yeah, they're keeping track of when in the missions you should be feeling certain things, and they match the swells of the music of like, no, now I understand that the music is present, something important is going on.
Mm-hmm. This game is an interesting term that a couple people used, which is three-dimensional fighting, which I thought, well, every video game that's not side-scrolling is three-dimensional, but this is really three-dimensional because there is another, you are using the Z-axis as well, or the Y-axis, or whatever, but you're going up and down as well as side to side and forward and back. Can't Blink says, From do an excellent job balancing the upward mobility and advantageous angles with combat patterns. One thing I would like is a way to launch downwards, like we can upwards. Ren, you were talking, this is a previous Armored Core thing that you could kind of launch downwards more?
No, you could control how much vertical thrust you were giving. Okay. And so a lot of vertical thrust would mean that you would go up, and then a little bit of vertical thrust means that like you could like slow your descent or stop yourself from like descending altogether. There's never been like a quickly descend to the ground option, although the game does have this. What you do is you basically disable your boost midair and take your hand off the controller entirely, and you will just plummet to the ground, because when you're moving through the air, what's happening is your boosters are like applying thrust, and they're applying that thrust at diagonal angles. You can see this if you like pay attention to what your boosters are doing in the air. They're actually like applying, even if you're just like going forward, they're applying a little bit of vertical thrust to be able to actually like keep you in the air for longer, such that that additional horizontal momentum actually matters. And so if you disable your boosters in the air and just let yourself plummet, you do fall pretty quickly.
You'll just fall like a 50-ton mech.
Exactly, yeah. You can see this really easily if you go to the Balteus fight and you let yourself just like, right before the Balteus fight, and you let yourself fall down that shaft with the reactors in. If you just take your hands off the controller, you will move much faster downwards than you thought that you could, which I think is neat.
Mason Cowell writes that the boss fights are so cool, it feels like they all have weak points to be exploited, such as the boss on top of the wall you can hit with vertical missiles that will come down on it. Here is a question that I've had playing through, and I imagine the answer is kind of like yes to both, is that this game feels much more designed to be constantly altering your build, rather than something like Dark Souls, where you say, I'm a heavy sword guy, and then you use a heavy sword the whole game. Should you expect to be able to kind of kill any boss with like any type of build if you are strong enough, or like or talented enough at the game? Or is it really a like, some enemies are just going to necessitate a type of movement that you can only get through like one sort of build?
The only question I have about this is with the shields in this game and staggering, and there being like, Balteus is in some ways a bit of a damage check for certain kinds of damage. Like, can you keep up the aggression to take his shield down fast enough that you can like kill him before he kills you? That is part of what Balteus is trying to teach you, is that like you have to be constantly aggressive if you want to win these fights. And that makes me wonder if certain builds are so ill-suited to some fights as to make them like borderline unviable. But like, I'm not sure yet. I don't think we can know this yet, because like Balteus, at least, I think you could take out with basically anything. As part of a Remap Radio stream with Patrick Klepek that I did, Patrick made me equip the most annoying mech for me possible, which was a tank treads based mech that had every single one of the heaviest parts available in the entire game. And so I almost went overburdened on the tank treads that the game gives you that make you slow as shit and very good at carrying things. And like even that was able to take out Balteus. And so like I am of the opinion that it will probably be, based on series precedent, you can do anything with anything, even if it is a real fucking struggle, or a real struggle, sorry. It
is remarkable putting on those heavy parts how much health you get. Like it is like, oh man, I have like, you know, it's like my lightest build has like 8,000 armor points or something, and it's like the heaviest one is like over 100k. It's like you can just take so much damage using one of those that it's like, yeah, it is a viable strategy to just literally tank your way through some stuff, because like, you know, you won't be able to avoid it, but maybe you won't even need to.
Yeah.
Let's see. Poor and Curly says the smoothness and movement of gameplay is so good. They nailed the feeling. That crunch when you land from a high jump is so satisfying. I love that they put all sort of stuff on the ground that does not actually slow you down at all. Like if there's a car in front of you and you boost over the car, you just...
You are not using tank treads.
Oh, the tank treads get hung up?
The tank treads get hung up on fucking everything if you're not boosting. Those tank treads are extremely annoying to get around with sometimes, because if you try and go over certain things, like you crunch over every little part of the things that you were going over.
Do you knock over trees?
Yeah.
That'd be cool. That's cool as hell.
It's very annoying. I the tank treads. I was very mad at Patrick for inflicting them upon me.
There's a couple notes on the kind of sound design. Barrett Boswell says there's one sound that was a staple in the older games that I dearly miss in this one. It's the high-pitched whine that comes right before you use your overboost jets. It's such an iconic sound of this series. I wish it was still in the game. But Cranberry says the out of energy sound sounds like an elevator chime. It's calm. It lets you know you're about to descend, and it's calm. And then there are a couple people who have written about the voice that tells you like 2 repair kits left, or like 50% out of ammo. Bryce Gilbert says it has great minor voice performances for non-human characters, which I think is totally true. You know, it's like having your robot have a good voice that it talks to you with is like very important.
Yeah, that you don't end up wanting to strangle by the end of that game. It's just like, just shut up. But yeah, like all of the warnings that they give you, and even like the pitch of like certain tells from enemies of like they're about to fire. All that stuff feels like none of it is annoying, which is like it's easy to take that stuff for granted.
The feeling of hearing that beep 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 of a shot having charged from an enemy and managing to pull off the dodge based on the sound, not the shot, is a really good feeling.
One of maybe the most kind of unusual mission in this first slate is the one where you go to the Boz industry plant and you fight a bunch of invisible things.
Yeah.
And it is, you are almost entirely, or I was, operating on those sound cues, because like you don't even know where to look to see where the shots are coming from, because they're all just like clinging to the walls and shooting at you. And I found that one, like, it's not challenging in that it's not hard to complete the mission, but like I wonder what my build should be for that, because all of the ones that I've done it with have not felt quite right. And I wonder, it's like, is that one, should I be like free aiming for that? You know, like how should I complete it?
So the one I found with that was using the grenade cannon, the songbirds that you get at the very end of chapter 1. You can fire that, and the explosion radius on those is big enough that, like, if you have a vague idea of where they're at, they're going to get staggered by the power of the explosions, even if it just clips them. And then while they're staggered, you can close the distance and just obliterate them with whatever weapon you have.
The enemy in that also has it's fun seeing weapons that you don't have access to yet, but presumably will at some point.
The whip.
There's an enemy that has like an energy whip that I was like, want that?
Yeah. And also, like, fighting Scylla was actually, like, they have a plasma cannon, which is, like, the thing that shoots what looks like bubbles at you. And I thought, like, oh, that's a dumb-looking weapon. And then that's the weapon that I ended up using to shred the Balteus shields, and just thinking, like, oh, that's a weapon meant for pulse shields. And then realizing, okay, I'm going to have to start the mission over because I need to buy that thing so that I can use it, and having to run through it again. Like, I have to use the lame bubble weapon that I hated.
Right. That's the clever thing about Balteus, is that, like, this fight really does tell you, like, here is everything you're going. That mission does tell you, like, here are most of the things that you're going to need to know before you go into this fight. Right. Pulse weapons, you should use them. They look a little bit silly, but they are effective. If you went into that fight against Sula with a pulse shield, you're gonna get obliterated by that weapon. Like, it's all fun and games unless you're using a pulse shield, in which case, like, it is very not fun to fight against that style of weaponry. And so that's the first thing it teaches you. The second one is that all that like cannon gauntlet that you have to go through before you get there, in part is teaching you how to avoid the bazooka shot from Balteus. Because it has the same beep, beep, beep shot pattern and like speed, like a projectile speed, or like a relatively similar projectile speed to the distances you're fighting it at, to those cannons from earlier, which, if you're really on it, you can dodge. And the timing is close enough where you're like, okay, cool. That beep, beep, beep is a sign that I have to be thinking about how I'm going to move out of the way of this, not a sign to, like, immediately. And so, like, I think it's a very clever mission for, like, teaching you, or for attempting to teach you these things. But like you said previously, the fodder enemies are so weak that it's hard for these lessons to get internalized, because you kind of just brain off through it.
Yeah. One of the things that's been challenging for me to kind of wrap my head around is, like, when you are fighting someone with a sword in, one of the other From games, you kind of avoid an attack or don't. It's like they do a big swing and you get hit by that and you lose most of your health, or you don't get hit by it and you're fine. And that's very different than something firing conservatively 1,000 missiles at you, which is like how Balteus works, where it's like there's actually, people have mentioned there are a couple VaatiVidya videos released recently, one of which is just a beginner's guide that's really helpful for just like, here's what every stat means. But he also did one that is like, can I make it through chapter 1 without getting hit at all? And like, you kind of can, but it's really like, it seems much easier to do a hitless Souls run than a hitless Armored Core run, just because you're dodging like bullets and missiles and they're not shot one at a time. And so like, figuring out if I have, quote unquote, dodged an attack, I is kind of more challenging here, because like, I don't know if it's good that I got away only kind of being scraped by the missiles, or if there is an alternate dodge pattern I could be using that would actually fully avoid everything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I definitely feel like the one thing that I don't feel like I've fully internalized is how to like look at like a maze of missiles coming at me, and besides like just dodging my way through them, is like, is there like a Returnal-esque, like, can I finesse my mech enough to completely avoid all of this damage? Because it'd feel like in that Balteus fight that like I was successful if I mitigated most of the damage of like, oh, most of them just clipped me and I'm fine, versus like, oh, I was able to kind of do the, like what you said, like the proper counter to this.
Mm-hmm. That's why I think that, I love the reverse jointed legs so much for the Balteus fight, is because the reverse jointed legs give you that like basically like true dodge capability. Because if you use reverse jointed legs on the ground instead of just doing a traditional boost, what you do is you kick off the ground as you boost, and it launches you way, way further forward. And so like, they feel like the if you want to get through without taking a single hit tool in a lot of ways. But also, like, if you get hit with that missile swarm with those legs, you will not have the stability to survive. If you're looking for a good middle ground between stability and speed, I really recommend the first set of tetrapod legs, because they have, similar to the tank treads, they can absorb recoil, although not as well, but they can absorb recoil so you don't have to go into shoot position, and also have way higher attitude control than the other parts in this game, and so can handle being... Basically, I went through the Balteus fight without ever being staggered if I used the tetrapod legs, versus the reverse jointed ones where I could get hit once and then I would be staggered and would just have to pray.
Curtis Love says, been playing Demon Souls alongside this for the first time, and it got me thinking about how intimate a lot of parts of From's games are. Designing an AC feels really engaging to me because I'm thinking about how I'm going to use it for a mission. Then going into that mission, I'm taking in every aspect of it when I go back and try to get an S rank. Similar to creating a build in other games. For me, it creates that deep understanding of the systems, which is what then pushes me to understand the worlds and their stories. I think that's a great point, and kind of is like, this is why the difficulty is important, conversation for these games of like, if you could get through this game and not have to pay attention to these systems, then it just feels like it would be so much less involving of an experience. It needs to be hard enough to push you to understand what all the stats mean, because then you have a reason to interact with it. And it turns out that like messing around with your mech is like the most fun part. But if there was one build that just did everything, which is why I'm a little worried about my like dual shotty missile build, is because it's so good. And it's like, I want to be pushed to do different things and understand it all, because like that is interacting with the systems.
I will say, Jacob, from what I've heard of later chapters from other people, I think we're gonna be fine in terms
I
of
am
the
sure
game
it's not going to
us,
stay good for long.
to change.
Yeah, and like one thing is that like one of the things I appreciate about this game is that it does feel like it is in a lot of ways. It feels like a game out of time, or that like that is like very much not like going to be for everyone, and it doesn't feel compelled to be, where it's like, this is just a really intense game in a lot of ways. And I think there are kind of conversations to be had about like difficulty, but like there are so many other ways in which this game is not like, this game is a very scaled down, very like not open world, like not RPG laden game that feels like it is trying to do one thing very, very well, and not trying to be like, we want to make a global like thing, and that they're just kind of doing the thing, and it's just not going to be for everyone. And I kind of appreciate that, like that a lot of games are basically games that aren't for everyone, trying to be games for everyone. And so like this feels like if you are looking for this particular kind of experience, they've tailored it like to a mirror sheen to be that, right? Versus trying to like make something for everyone.
I mean, in a lot of ways, it's in a close position to something like Sekiro. I think in terms of like the most recent like FromSoft offerings, where like in some ways it's an interesting inversion of Sekiro to me, and that like, Jacob, you have your video about perfecting parries in Sekiro, and then the ways in which like learning that game feels like learning feels like playing music from like playing sheet music. Where like the thing that I find really fascinating about Armored Core 6 is that like when I think about when I was grinding the Balteus fight with a bunch of different builds, it didn't feel like the rote like pattern recognition and like pattern execution that is at the core of a game like Sekiro. It has instead felt like playing music in the improvisational sense, and like the participatory conversational sense, where you're like playing with another person and then like producing something on the fly together. It feels like a live performance in that way. And like, that is a very particular feeling and a very particular relationship to like difficulty and combat that I think the game like pulls off extremely well, but also like very much is not for everyone, right? Like to be able to like play an instrument well requires a specific kind of investment, and to be able to improvise with an instrument well requires a totally different kind of investment. And like, that is the thing that I find like really fascinating about AC6, and like the ways in which it like primes expressivity and like replayability as like that is the thing that you're buying here. That is the game. Playing the missions again is the game.
And I love that part of this game is like, seems like you're trying to join the orchestra with a piano. Have you considered using a tuba? And then you have to like learn a different instrument to play along with it.
Right.
Yeah.
But it makes you better. That's the thing, is that like learning multiple instruments makes you better at understanding how they work in concert with one another. And like when it says, will you use a tuba? Then suddenly when you're playing with another tuba player, you're like, oh fuck, that guy's playing a tuba. I know exactly how to set him up for a really cool moment. And then like the choreography starts. I think it's so cool.
And like I think this game, I'm not even entirely sure if it has multiplayer. I haven't experimented with that at all. I think this game would be like I would be interested to see like what a 2v2 situation is, because then you can like create builds that do exactly that, of like, I'm going to be the super tank person. Meanwhile, I have this hummingbird behind me, or like ahead of me, like basically poking and prodding and like the enemy and kind of chasing them down. And when they try to chase the hummingbird, then I'm like the tank kind of in their way. And I'm like, I don't even do that much damage, but I'm super annoying. Meanwhile, like, yeah. So like the way those different builds could interplay with each other just seems like it has so much room for potential.
Luke Tucker says, I can't shake how much of this game feels like a throwback. Simple and quick mission structure 90% of the time, then some big fights spread out really thoughtfully. It feels like how I remember PS2 action hack and slashes feeling without really even being one. I love small missions so damn much. I absolutely think I would not be as into this game if I could not replay a mission in like 4 minutes.
Do you know the only mission in any game I've ever replayed as much as the missions in this game?
No, I don't.
Jacob, there's a way to know the answer. Okay, it's the Jetstream Sam fight.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Jetstream Sam is a fight that I have played hundreds of times. It is like Balteus now is for me, a meditative experience to like fight Jetstream Sam, and like except that like, you know, I've gotten past the point where I'm interested in doing no hit run Jetstream Sam and Balteus, and instead it is about like, how do I make the most beautiful version of this fight? How do I choreograph this in the right way that like the hits feel earned, and every like, you know, beat feels correct? And like, yeah, that is what these short missions let you do, is like really refine your understanding of like a specific like progression through the world.
Yeah, and that's part of... Sorry, Jetstream Sam is from Metal Gear Rising Revengeance, the best game ever made. Surreal, go ahead.
No, and I think part of it is that, like, yeah, it is, like, the reason I mentioned that I really like that it's not necessarily built for everyone is that it for people who, like, hey, they just released, like, From Software just released their biggest game ever, right? And now they're making this very hyper-specific thing. I think it's going to get a lot of people to play this game. It's like, I saw recently that it has higher, like, peak concurrence on Steam than, like, Sekiro or Dark Souls 3. So it's like, this is a popular game now. And so like the idea that people are just going to be introduced to like this particular kind of game, I think is just going to like get you to think about difficulty and whether or not it is about getting through something for like the one time, which is what a lot of the Dark Souls games are. It's just like, oh, I've beaten this character, I no longer have to interact with them, versus something like it is about the repeat performances. It is about turning it into like this performance, and like thinking about difficulty not as like a thing to overcome, but a thing to like immerse yourself in and like have it be like what Ren was saying, as a meditative experience of like, I don't necessarily care whether I get through this so that I can move on to the next thing. It is like I am lingering and being in the moment about like doing this very intricate thing well.
Yeah, I think that one of the notes that I have in my little notes document right now is Armored Core, and the same way that Elden Ring prizes execution, which it does, elemental resistances in Elden Ring are extremely important. I actually think that most of your like a lot of the fights in Elden Ring are actually determined by how thoroughly you explored the world, but you can hear more about that in a thing that will come out eventually. Putting that aside, both the means and the end are to create the most perfectly idealized body, the most beautiful weapon, either in its aesthetic cohesion or in the beauty of its perfect efficiency. That is like my current like core note in the AC6 section, is that like it is about expression and like aesthetic cohesion.
Right. It is about the how, not the what, right? It is not about like, I've beaten this boss, but it's like, how did you do it? And like the game is very much about like teaching you like the value of just like think about it a little bit more than as just an obstacle.
Yeah.
I think that the concurrent players stat is really interesting because this is the second highest from concurrent players ever. It had 156,000 at launch. Do you know what the peak Elden Ring number was? Anyone? 950,000. Wow. So it's like, this is the second biggest game. Elden Ring was still 5 times bigger. But anyway, it's very exciting. Kaz says that it's more than Dark Souls 3 or Sekiro. Do you think this will pave the way for more ambitious mech games in the future? Is From going to make more of these?
Oh, I think we will get an AC6 expansion. I really think that we will get like an AC6 expansion in the same way that like we got 4 Answer as a response to 4. I think that 6 will get its Fires of Rubicon will get its answer.
Yeah, I don't know that this is indicative of like there's going to be a huge wave of mech games that are just like this, because like I think one of the things I like is it's not like I don't think people are looking at this game and saying like mechs, that's the thing, that's the market we need to hit now, and you're going to see like a Ubisoft mech game, 4 years from now. But I like that that basically From Software used their Elden Ring money to make like this game for freaks, basically. Of just like we want to make one of these, and we are allowed to do this because what are you going to do? Stop us? Like, we're the From Software people now. And like, yeah, we're going to make Elden Ring 2 at some point, and then there's the expansion as well. But like the fact that they were able to corral this team together is like one of those cool things that you just get to watch these people do what they love.
Let's talk about the arena a little bit, because it is an important part of the experience. We talked about the missions being cool and short. The arena is even cooler and shorter because it is just fight this one other AC. And a lot of them, interestingly, are... I guess what I find kind of fascinating about this is I guess it takes place outside of the fiction of the main story, because you do kill people in here that you also met and or killed in the main game, but you get to like learn. They have little biographies that you can read and you learn more about them.
So these are VR missions. Basically, the like history of this game is
makes
that
sense.
In previous games, including For Answer, basically what registered mercenaries had to do was submit their piloting data. And because so much of these mechs is when it comes to these games, is being controlled literally with your brain. And in the case of Armored Core 6, like you are fully controlling this mech with a neural interface. It's really easy to replicate people's fighting styles in the form of like mostly accurate AI that can operate in VR. But are not good enough to operate as like autonomous craft. So like you can't just like copy someone's like piloting style and create an autonomous craft that can perform at the same ability as them, but you can create a simulation in which 2 people piloting mechs with their brains can have a close to real experience. And so that is what the narrative like framing around this is. And this is what basically gives mercenaries their ranks. And so is how you can be sure about who you're hiring. Basically, the higher ranked mercenary you're hiring, the more certain you can be that they're going to be able to get the job done.
Do either of y'all have any particular favorite arena people that you fought so far?
I haven't played the arena yet. Like, I basically just got done with like the end of chapter boss, like basically late yesterday before I went out, and so I really want to get into the arena stuff because it seems like it's just like oops all boss battles basically.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry.
I really like just the first one is Invincible Rummy. Who is just like, it's just this game's Glass Joe, spoilers, not invincible, but it is funny, and they do give them we haven't really talked about like what this game looks like, but obviously the high point is just the mech designs, and like as it comes up, it gives them like a real kind of glory, like a Michael Bay swinging camera, like here is the mech you're about to be fighting. And so just seeing all of these different mechs, which all have like different paint styles and like insignias and whatever, is very, very cool. And notably, the one that I was like, is you fight Little Z, who is the one from the Liberation Front, that you fight in that mission, the collecting logs mission as well. And so when she popped up there, I was like, oh my gosh, I know her.
Yeah, and like I imagine that those are also cases where they can just show you different builds and say like this is a thing you could try if you wanted.
Absolutely.
So after you defeat them, you get their schematics, and once you unlock the parts, once you buy the parts that you need, you can just basically equip those schematics like you can your own.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, if you go to the AC schematics menu and like tab over twice, it shows you all of the like built-in designs that you have seen. There are also share codes, so you can download other people's AC designs in addition to your own, which I'm sure will be very cool as time goes. I'm sure people will be sharing a lot of builds that you can just like download and port in. Because like, again, I think this game's sharing features and like, you know, multiplayer integration is like really good for what they're trying to make this to. Which is a game about sharing builds and like that expressivity.
We've talked a lot about kind of the experience of being a mech pilot and whatever. We haven't really touched that much on the larger story. Simon K writes, playing this game has made me realize how much I love the narrative archetype of mega corporations militarizing themselves to maintain control over natural resources. The plot hasn't revolved around goofy-looking aliens or unexplained paranormal phenomena, but just humans being greedy and generally kind of shitty to one another. This is just a game about two people fighting over oil, right? Or two corporations. Like the planet is full of coral, which is some sort of unlimited energy resource, and everyone just wants it. Is that like? Are we missing more nuance? Is Coral, because Coral also kind of feels like the life stream in Final Fantasy VII, right? Yeah. In that it has like magic abilities that it gives you when you are covered in it.
Yeah, I mean, there's. Oh, go ahead.
No, please.
Yeah, I think there's like that is partially like I think why the storytelling is so effective is because it's just it's using like the most evocative elements of everything it's trying to do because like as much as we've been talking about the story and stuff, like this all happens like in the like pre-mission thing and then like in very like short snippets of dialogue as you're playing the missions, right? So it has to be hyper efficient with all of its storytelling. And so like the fact that we're able to talk at this depth for a game where it's like, yeah, there have effectively been no cutscenes up until the end of chapter 1. And like all of it takes place through like the game's interface, I think it's like they're playing in the broadest strokes to get across very specific points. And I think it's like it's really elegant storytelling, even if it's not the most like mind breaking or like intricate storytelling so far.
Yeah.
I do want to talk about the voice acting a little bit. Swiggity Swooty said, as someone who got into Gundam within the past few years, this is the Gundam game I've been waiting for. The occasional cheesy voice delivery in this game is the cherry on top. Handler Walter is both, as Fred DeNovo writes, played by the same voice actor that plays Endeavor in My Hero Academia. And he is also from For Answer, apparently. Maybe not the same character, but like the voice actor was in For Answer as well.
Oh, yeah, that is, I believe the voice actor for Handler Walter is also the voice actor for, oh God, I think that might be, Ostrava. Ostrava, as I believe. Ostrava.
Yeah, that guy is really good at playing hard asses, just like people who are like... Yep. Just inherently emotionally unavailable or very like stoic or like I'm not going to talk about my feelings at all. And so like, yeah, bringing him on is like a pretty obvious thing when you need that character to just be super cold and very masculine.
The other super cold voice that we commonly hear is Allmind, which is just kind of like seems like the kind of AI corp that organizes all the mercenaries. That's just like, hey, good job. You did it seems like it's like DoorDash for AC pilots, right? In that it's just like the organizing structure that, you know, pats you on the back and tells you did a good job for doing a mercenary run.
Yep. Previous games, it's been the Raven's Nest, That was the name for it in the earlier games when talented AC pilots were called Ravens. It was the organization was the Raven's Nest, and then an Armored Core 4 answer becomes Collard, spelled Collard, Collared, as a reference to the fact that basically Lynx or AC pilots, who their name for new types in AC4A is Lynxes, are effectively collared dogs, who are used to who are sicked on one another, and so the organization is called Collard, if I'm remembering correctly.
And then there are a lot of other. It's actually it's like there aren't that many other factions, but it feels like there are a lot because there are a lot of names for each one. So it's like Balam is one of the big corporations fighting over the planet. They have Defang, which is kind of like their parts division. Like when you're buying things, you can see that they are sometimes from Defang. And then they have the Red Guns, which is their AC squad under Balam. Similarly, there's Arquebus, which has Schneider as its parts and Vespers as its AC unit. Something that I think is cool, and forgive me for referencing Borderlands, but like it has the weapon manufacturers thing that I always think of as like a Borderlands thing, where it's just like you see Schneider and you're like, this is a light one. You know, generally, like it seems like each one specializes. So even though you can, of course, look at all your stats at the bottom of the page, like it is just kind of giving you like, you need a heavy build, use this manufacturer, it'll probably do you pretty well.
Yeah, and like narratively, there's also like Gundam stuff going on, like the way that Anaheim Electronics is basically like one of these corps essentially, is that like, oh, they do basically work for both sides more or less in a lot of the fiction. And so, but like people come to Anaheim Electronics because they're like the Gundam people. They're the people who make like the most advanced technology. But there is also this like, you know, they're double dealing in a lot of ways. And so like the idea that the factions are like kind of irrelevant, but also that's what the game is about, is that the factions are irrelevant and that it's all broken down into corporate nonsense.
So where do y'all think this story is going? I feel like we are going to be asked I guess the obvious way would be like, hey, do you want to side with the planet or the the corporations exploiting it? But that almost feels too obvious. It feels too much like a good and bad choice. And so other than like finding out like about the specific AC pilots that you've seen throughout the game, I kind of don't know I don't know what direction this story is going to take, because I have no experience with this series, or really very little with kind of mech stories in general. And so like, I don't know what the arcs of these things usually look like, other than the shot going over the guy's head while he says, wow, cool robot. I know what that arc looks like.
Yeah, I would say that my guess is that the Array plot line will become more complicated. I would be unsurprised if that path is not available until your second playthrough or third playthrough, because that is frequently how these games work. And so that's kind of the thing that I was worried about with the particular structure that we're doing here, is because like those other plot lines are like fully locked off until you have like played through the game one time.
Yeah, I could see it being like a near situation where it's like the second time through you're basically playing the game, like you have the option to start the game from like the Liberation Front side of just like, oh, someone else found you, or like you make the choice almost immediately to not side with it, and then like that changes like maybe it doesn't necessarily fundamentally change the missions, but it does say like, hey, you're doing these missions effectively from the opposite side.
Historically, it does actually change the missions. They are like different objectives, different difficulties, different enemy layouts between the like various like paths of the game. It does actually like shift things pretty significantly in terms of like what you're being asked to do, at least in previous games. But I think that like the interesting thing here is that there is a bit more of a personal story in terms of like Handler Walter as a character with like real specific motivations. And he is like the person in control of you, as opposed to previous games where like the person in control of you specifically, is not like your handler is not the one who is
They're not the focus of the story.
Right, they're not the focus of the story, but they are important, right? The handler in AC4 Answer is she's extremely sick. In fact, if you play the evil route of the game and try to blow up everyone, she deploys for the first time in decades to fight you because she was basically your handler is an old war hero who was one of the best Lynx pilots who has ever existed, but basically fried out her brain. And so was not able to pilot anymore, but against you, deploys for the last time in order to try and save the world by defeating the mercenary that she herself trained. It's so fucking sick. Armored Core rules.
That's very cool. Suriel, do you have predictions about, at least for the first playthrough? Like, where do you think it's going to end? Are we going to, like, destroy the world? Will we see the fires of Rubicon that we saw in that kind of, like, cutscene?
Yeah, I could totally see that. I could see them almost kind of hinting at this shift by, like, saying, like, the last kind of mission of the first game is, like, to some degree, like, your handler's disowning you and saying, like, you've become enough of a problem that we're basically going to turn all of our squads against you, and having it be like a thing where, like, at the end, like, you beat the final boss, but then you still end up dying because it's like, oh, you were too dedicated to the corpos, basically. And so, like, if only there were another way to this, and then you start the second playthrough and it's like, what if I joined the Liberation Front immediately?
I think that's a good call. Some sort of tease to get you back in there. Here are some more random notes that I wrote down. The Balteus looks like Pandora's box from Devil May Cry 4. Suriel, I was wondering if you noticed that. I'm
sure now, yeah.
I'm sure they're both playing on some just classic, like anime missile trope, but the thing where he just surrounds himself with missile launchers and shoots all of them is totally a DMC4
totally
thing.
Right, yeah.
Here's, okay. Dumb question. EN shortfall. Is that just about your generator? Is that what you need to change?
Yeah, you need to change. You need to change your generator or your core. Your core affects it a little bit, but it's mostly your generator. You can also change out if you like have a part that you don't super need that has a high EN cost. You can probably cut it. But yeah, that is mostly determined by your generator, and then your load is determined mostly by your legs.
Okay. Here's another note that I have. The explosions in this game look so good.
Yeah.
Wow, they just went in on explosions, and they are so, like, multi-stage, It's especially, the mining rig. Good lord. I could just watch that thing explode 20 times in a row.
Yeah, like the way that they even changed like the way the camera is like the coloration on the camera and stuff whenever something like explodes real big. It's just like, man, like you feel like the concussive force of those explosions really, really well.
It also helps that they slow down time for the final hit in EC and boss fights, which makes everything all the more delectable.
Yeah, which for me on the time that I got through Balteus, it was like literally like I staggered it, and then I'm like firing I used my sword and like had run out of pulse cannon ammo, and so it was just like all I have literally is this punch is my fist, and so like I punch it like 3 times, and the last time is when it slows down and I finally destroy it.
More games need hit stop. More games need hit stop. Hit stop is the answer to making either getting hits or being or hitting someone feel really good. I think that people should add more hit stop.
It's true. Watch those Zachary explains videos. He talks all about it. Do any of y'all have notes that we have not yet brought up in this discussion?
I feel like I'm gonna diverge from both of you. I'm just gonna be the most tank guy ever. I'm just gonna go like the heaviest builds and start and learn how to drift and just be like Gundam on legs. Be a gun tank basically.
The only note that I have in here is talking about like resources and fights. Basically,
you can run out. You can run out of ammo.
Well, also like the way in which you are a resource, and the ways in which like the resources that you spent, both in terms of HP and ammunition, is tallied at the end of a mission, even though that money doesn't like super matter to you. You're never gonna go into the red in the game, but it's still calculated. In earlier games, you actually could go into the red on missions and like spend more than you actually made, and they've loosened that up a little bit. But
It acts like a soft ranking system early on, right? To say like, okay, I could have done that mission better, and I could have used less ammo, could have died fewer times. But yeah, it's like a really fun system that also ties in narratively of like, this is all just the business. This is all like for the sake of making you money so that you can buy more things to be a better, to what end? To buy more weapons and be a better war machine.
Well, that's the thing, is that like in this world, conflicts are determined by how much resources spent on them. You can have a pretty linear relationship between
in that world
in Armored Core.
Yeah.
In
this far off fantasy vision of
it has
what
no
life would be
relation
like.
to our real world, so I was confused.
Yeah, exactly. Basically, I have a note here. In IBO, Iron Blooded Orphans' most recent Gundam series, like AC6, the actual outcome of a given conflict is determined by how many resources were allocated to that fight. Your Armored Core and Gundam Barbados are just particularly effective resources, one which could be obliterated from near orbit with enough money and logistics.
I mean, it could be obliterated from orbit with that laser cannon that we saw in the first cutscene of the game.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And just like, the way that basically the existence of MTs basically would have like eventually, I don't know the timeline, but like would have facilitated the need for ACs, and it like this constant escalation, some sort of like industrial complex, but militaristic.
My other fun lore note is that the difference between MTs and ACs is basically like there is no technical difference between an MT and an AC. The only difference is that basically ACs are MTs built around interchangeable parts. So basically there's a core frame upon which they're built, but like the underlying technology is still the same. It's just that like AC parts are so much more specialized, but you could just jam an AC arm onto an MT because they operate on the same basic system.
It does feel like, in the sense that, a Lamborghini and my 2009 Honda Fit are both cars.
Right.
It's like, hey, they both drive. And so in that technical way, they are the same.
Right. And so like, what if you were against thousands of Honda Fits in a Lamborghini? You're not going to lose the fucking race, but you may be worried about like being boxed into a corner as you go and having to like cut your way through. Yeah.
Well, I think, I don't know. I think we're good on this. It's like the shorter, deeper dive than we've done in the past, but only because we're only talking about chapter 1 here.
Yeah.
There are 5 total chapters in the game. The first playthrough, and then I have learned you should do subsequent playthroughs. But for the next discussion, which we are probably going to record next Sunday, so the Patreon post will go out at a similar time. We're going to be talking about chapters 2 and 3. Will we go nuts like Ren and buy all of the parts for those chapters as well? Probably. Because I can't stop thinking about this game. It's like, it truly is like, when I close my eyes, I wish I was playing Armored Core.
Yeah, I like games about extremes, and it feels like this is all just like going in on the one. It feels like it's just allocating all of its stat points in like cool mechs and not like any whatever is going on in the outside gaming world. Not interested. This is about making freaky ass looking mechs, and it's awesome.
If you listen to this discussion and you want to contribute to the next one, join MinnMax on Patreon at the $2 tier. You will be able to put your thoughts in the Google Doc that we will post for the next one. Maybe we'll read them and talk about them on the show. I appreciate everyone who wrote in this time. We didn't talk about performance, but both X and Taylor Wagon noted this game runs real well. On everything, on a PS4, on a Steam Deck, on everything.
Yeah.
It is very optimized, much like a good Armored Core.
Oh, that's fun. Oh, that's cute, Jacob. Nice work. Hell yeah.
That's right.
We got to close.
All right, yeah, let's just shut it down now. Suriel, anything you want to plug? What should people do if they want to hear more from you?
Yeah, I have currently a podcast about The Legend of Zelda: Tears of the Kingdom, where I'm playing through that game over the course of several weeks and just taking my time with it. I'm like at 20 hours, and like I've only revealed like a third of the map at this point, because I'm like every time I see a thing I can climb, I climb it. I'm not in any way speeding up my playthrough. So and then I also play other Zelda games. Like right now I'm playing Link to the Past, or I played Link to the Past, and now I'm starting Link's Awakening. So it's just a big old Zelda podcast. And I have a Patreon where I like release videos and stuff, and you can support me there. So yeah, that's all my stuff.
Ren, how about you?
The stuff I'm most excited about isn't ready to be out or plugged yet, but eventually. But maybe next week I'll have something cool to plug, or maybe the week after that I'll have something cool to plug. We'll see. But otherwise, I am a temporary host on Remap Radio for a little while longer. I'm very excited about this. I will be continuing to host there through September, which is very fun. And you can follow me on Twitter at Ren or Raven.
And that's it. Thank you so much for joining us on this edition of the Deepest Dive Armored Core 6 Part 1. For next week, play through chapters 2 or 3. I don't know, paint your AC bright pink or something. Have fun with it, because
That's what I did.
When it comes to war, it's really all about aesthetics. Bye.
Bye.
See ya.
Hello everybody, this is Ben Hansen from MinnMax cutting in. Jacob Geller's doing a beautiful job, but we lined up a little something extra that I want everybody to know about. So if you choose to support MinnMax on Patreon, support independent games media at patreon.com/MinnMax with 2 N's on Monday, August 28th, Tuesday the 29th, or Wednesday the 30th. If you jump into Patreon, we have 70 Steam codes to give away, and we will send you a Steam code via Patreon. We have 30 for the fantastic DLC for Dead Cells, so Return to Castlevania. This includes the base game and the DLC, Return to Castlevania, which came out earlier this year. So if you're a new supporter on Patreon or a returning supporter on Patreon, jump in at any tier, contribute to the Deepest Dive, unlock the podcast version, and get a Steam code. So if you've been on the fence for a while about supporting MinnMax or supporting the Deepest Dive format, here's an extra incentive. Let us give you a game. Return to Castlevania. It's a good one. Everybody else. So please help support independent games media. Head over to patreon.com/MinnMax with 2 N's.